Hello, my name is Ian Hartitz with PFF, and I'm here to tell you today about why Trey Lance has all the makings of the next great fantasy football quarterback. Fantasy. I'm not going to crown him just yet. We've barely seen him play much in the NFL, and to be fair, the guy only played one game in his final season at North Dakota State. It's essentially been 3 years at this point since we've seen Trey Lance be a full-time quarterback, so it's pretty tough to expect someone to get better at something by not actually doing it. With that said, he's the man now, and this is not a rumor, this is not a report, this is from Kyle freaking Shanahan himself. We have moved on to Trey Lance. This is Trey's team. We think Jimmy would have been traded if not for the surgery. So, the big point here, because the concern for Trey Lance was always, okay, they traded up to get him at freaking number 3 overall. Of course, he's going to be the quarterback of the future. But as we've seen 2 of the last 3 years, this is a 49ers team more than capable of making the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl at least once with Jimmy Garoppolo as their quarterback. So I understood the cause for concern, I guess, with Trey Lance before Jimmy G was completely out of the picture. What if Trey starts the season off horrifically for the first 2-3 weeks? Would Kyle Shanahan really go down with the ship or turn it back over to Jimmy? It just seems like, guys, again, this is not a report saying that it's Trey's team. This is Kyle Shanahan himself going out there on that limb. So I am moving forward under the absolute certainty that Trey Lance is going to be the 49ers starting quarterback, for better and for worse, from week 1 through week 18, hopefully longer into the playoffs for 49ers fans. But with the real life implications aside, I don't really think there's a debate that he is going to be the next great fantasy football quarterback, because we don't see players with this sort of archetype bust in fantasy football. Pass catching running backs, the rushing wide receivers like we saw with Deebo Samuel last year, more rare, but then the rushing quarterbacks, these players with multiple facets of getting production, it's just tough to beat. They're playing a different position. Guys like Jalen Hurts, guys like Lamar Jackson, we nitpick what they do as a passer, but when we add on an extra 100-plus rush attempts over what other pocket passers are getting, that's why we see these rushing quarterbacks consistently at the top of fantasy football leaderboards. So, in regards to Trey Lance, PFF right now projects him for 133 total rush attempts in 2022. This is not far off. I mean, we saw only 3 extended appearances from Trey Lance last season, and he had 31 carries in those games. So, even being kinder, I guess, would maybe not be the right word, but even being more conservative, there we go, with Trey Lance's carry estimate, because again, that's over 10 carries per game. What we saw last year, a mark that we will never basically see a quarterback keep over the duration of the entire season. Even a more conservative estimate, 8 carries per game, that leads to 136 rush attempts across a 17-game season. PFF's going even more conservative, but 133, guys, that's a pretty special number, because we've actually only seen 12 quarterbacks in over the last decade have at least 125 rush attempts in a season. 11 of those 12 quarterbacks went on to work as top 12 quarterbacks in fantasy land in terms of fantasy points per game. Now, that per game part's huge, because a lot of times we see people use the final season finishes, and it just rewards players who were available to play the entire season. And I get it, availability is the best ability and all of that, but in fantasy football, if your guy's out of the picture, you'd almost rather take that so you can start someone else in place of him, as opposed to having someone just giving you mediocre production that ends up looking a lot better by the end of the season. Look no further than guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Antonio Gibson. When people tell you, look, they were the RB8, RB7 last season, what's the big deal? The big deal is when you look at their fantasy points per game and you see them much closer to the RB2 borderline, where we all, again, we're ranking them week after week after week. So 11 of these 12 quarterbacks with at least 125 rush attempts in a season, top 12 quarterbacks per game. The only one that missed was 2020 Cam Newton. He was actually the QB 17 working with that Patriots room that, let's face it, made Tom Brady look more mortal than we've pretty much ever seen at this point. And I think a lot of people would even be surprised that Cam Newton was as good as he was in that situation, where obviously not a lot was going right for that entire offense. So the other side of the coin is Trey Lance. What can he do as a passer? He did average 8.5 yards per attempt last season. Jimmy Garoppolo led the NFL in yards per attempt last season. I don't exactly think yards per attempt is the best stat to kind of show how great a quarterback is. PFF passing grade's good. Quarterback rating, not great. I think it kind of tells you more of the entire offense, but adjusted completion rate. There are a ton of different stats that I think go into quarterback performance, and I'm not sitting here trying to tell you that one is completely more important than the other one. I think, the more stats we can have to help paint a more clear picture, the better. Like, why do we need to hang our hat on one stat and just make this the be-all, end-all? If QBR tells us a lot, then we can combine that with PFF passing grade and combine that with yards per attempt to get the best stat. Fantastic. But guess what? In fantasy football, we don't care. All yards count the same. Style points really don't matter. In fact, they don't matter. So Jimmy Garoppolo, I don't think he's the best quarterback in the league for averaging the most yards per attempt, but that's pretty great to have in fantasy land. But let's not even compare Trey Lance to Jimmy Garoppolo. That's not fair. Jimmy G, we've seen him as a passer, and I know he has his critics, but yes, let's admit that Jimmy G at this point in time is a much better professional passer than Trey Lance. What about Nick Mullens? Remember Nick Mullens, 2018? Second year Kyle Shanahan's in town, no Deebo Samuel, no Brandon Ayuk yet. And this man, Nick Mullens, had a cult following by the time he was done in San Francisco because of his efficiency and this yards per attempt number that continuously puts Kyle Shanahan's quarterbacks amongst the best quarterbacks, or I should say, most efficient quarterbacks in the entire league. So seriously, Nick Mullens, 10th in yards per attempt with the 49ers from 2018 to 2020 among 50 quarterbacks with 300 dropbacks. That's like it's not an entire season sample size. It's about half a season sample size, but 300, that's a pretty good number. And again, 10th out of those 50 quarterbacks, more efficient on a per throw basis. This is Nick Mullens, not Jimmy G. Nick Mullens was more efficient on a per throw basis than Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, and more. Was Nick Mullens better than them? Of course not. But all of this, and again, a lot of that production was without George Kittle, without Deebo Samuel. He did have Kittle in there. It was without Deebo Samuel and without Brandon Ayuk because they weren't even on the team yet. Like, this offense is built for someone like Trey Lance to just rack up easy yards because of how great Kyle Shanahan has been, basically engineering those easy yards after the catch. Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, they're absolute dogs. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. We've all seen what they can do with the ball in their hands, but it's the perfect system. Having someone like Shanahan design these plays, and the results have been impeccable. Only the Rams, and Sean McVay, pretty good play caller in his own right, have averaged more yards per attempt on passes thrown behind the line of scrimmage than the 49ers since Kyle Shanahan got into town. Since Deebo Samuel joined the team in 2019, nobody has been more efficient on passes behind the line of scrimmage. So, when we see Jimmy literally toss the ball 6 inches to Deebo Samuel and he runs for a 60-yard touchdown, that's technically a pass. Is it pretty ridiculous that we consider that a pass in fantasy football? Absolutely, but it's the game we play. Let's take advantage of it with someone like Trey Lance. So right now, depending on the site you go to, you'll find Trey Lance's ADP a bit all over the place. QB9's last spot, I saw him on Underdog Fantasy, but you go to ESPN and Yahoo and some of these more home league sites, and the guy is still going right around the QB1 borderline. I have him up as my QB7 behind Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen. So I just think that, again, Trey Lance with the 125-plus rush attempts inside of an offense that will get the most out of him as a passer, the floor might as well be the roof in fantasy land. I really don't see the way that he busts here. It's one of these things where if he gets hurt, okay, that could happen to every player throughout the league. But with Jimmy G out of the picture, per Kyle Shanahan himself, with the offense designed to not replicate what RG3 did as a rookie, but we sure as hell know, and we saw in Trey Lance's 3 extended appearances last year, that they are willing to tap into his upside as a rusher, and just having all this talent all over the place. Kittle, Deebo, Ayuk, my God, put one of those guys on the Chicago Bears and imagine the conversations we could be having about Justin Fields. I think it's the perfect marriage of factors surrounding Trey Lance to make him fantasy football's next great quarterback.